Hi guys, it's Wendy from Cinnamon Sweet Shop, and I'm coming to you from the Garden of Reflection in Lower Makefield, Pennsylvania. Today, I'm going to be making some crumb buns. Every time I tell someone I'm going to be making a crumb bun, they automatically assume it's the same thing as a crumb cake. And I get a lot of reaction like, oh, crumb cake, I get that all the time. Well, a crumb bun and a crumb cake are not quite the same. The difference would be the crumb cake is really more cake and less crumb, and the crumb bun is really more crumb and a little less cake. And crumb buns are very popular in New Jersey. I don't know why. I don't know if they originated there. You may find people in New York that have heard about it, but frankly in 48 other states, they probably never even heard of a crumb bun, and that's why they generally get it mixed up with crumb cake. Now, to make the crumb bun, you'll need a pan that is about 9 by 13 inches, some vegetable oil or canola oil spray, milk. I have here almond milk, but you can use whole milk instead, salt, butter, an egg, sugar. Now, I always use the raw organic sugar, but you can use the granulated sugar as well. We're going to be using yeast in this recipe, which means that it's going to take a little bit longer, or actually about an hour longer, to make this type of cake compared to other cakes. Some warm water. Now this is lightly warm, roughly about 100 degrees. We're going to add the yeast into this. And I have 2 cups of flour here and a half a cup of flour here that I kept out. Before we make the crumb buns, to prepare, I sprayed the pan with the canola oil. I'm just going to let that sit for a while. And with a 1/4 cup of lukewarm water, it should be warm enough that you could touch it, not real hot. I'm going to mix the yeast together with the water. Just going to pour this in here. I'm just going to take a pinch of sugar and just pour that in as well, and just mix it up. And I want to let this sit for about 5 minutes to get frothy. If it doesn't get frothy, it means your yeast is bad. It could be outdated, or maybe it just was not stored correctly. And the only other remedy for that would be just to throw it out and get some new fresh yeast and start with that. If your yeast is not frothy, your dough will not rise. So it's very important for that to be fresh yeast. In my KitchenAid, I have softened unsalted butter, and to that I'm going to add the yeast, which is nice and bubbly. And I'm just going to begin mixing it on a very low speed. From there I'm going to add in this sugar. I'm going to let that cream together for a little bit before I add in anything else. From there I'm going to add in the egg, and what I did was I did beat up the egg yolk a little bit so it'll incorporate into the mixture a little bit better. I have the salt, and I also have the milk. Now I warmed it up slightly. You don't want it really hot, it will kill the yeast, but you don't want it cold either. So it's a little bit warmer than room temperature, about the same temperature that the warm water was before I mixed it with the yeast. And I'm going to add that in. And again, I'm going to let this mix up until it's completely incorporated before I go ahead and add the flour in. I'm going to slowly add the flour so it doesn't fly all over the place. Let that incorporate. Now I'm going to add all of it except for the 1/2 cup that I reserved out. That we may or may not need depending on the dough. We want a nice sticky dough. We don't want it too dry, or else the cake will actually come out very dry. So I'm going to mix this in first to see the texture of it. And I'm going to add some more in here. And I'm using a whole wheat pastry flour. You can use a cake flour. And I'm adding it in just enough. I do want this to be a little on the sticky side, but I want it to come together as well. As you can see, the dough is actually pulling away from the sides, so you have one big dough mass. And the next step would be to spray a bowl with the cooking oil, just to lightly spray it. And we're going to put the dough into the bowl, cover it with a towel, and keep it in a nice warm corner of the room for about an hour till it doubles in size. If your room is cold, you may want to turn up the heat because in the winter time especially, the dough doesn't always rise as high if you live in a cold winter climate. But if it's in the summer, just make sure it's in a nice warm area of the room. And if your room happens to be cold, you can always put some warm towels around the side of the bowl, and that will help it rise as well. For the crumb topping, you're going to need some cake flour. Now I use whole wheat pastry flour, which you can use instead of cake flour. You do not want to use an all-purpose flour, and keep in mind too, whole wheat flour and whole wheat pastry flour are not the same. The whole wheat pastry flour is a lot lighter and is more on the lines of a cake flour. It can be used in place of all-purpose flour as well, but a whole wheat flour is very dense. I also have some coconut sugar, but you can use a light brown sugar instead if you're not keeping this a clean diet. Sugar, I use my raw organic sugar, but you can use the granulated sugar instead. I do have salt here, cinnamon, a little bit of ground nutmeg, and I do freshly grind my nutmeg. And then I have here some cardamom, which is a spice. It's somewhat easy to find. You can find it in the grocery store. If you can't find it, you could leave it out, but I do like to add it. It does add a little extra flavor. And if you go to my blog, I do say something about an ingredient that's very hard to get or it's expensive. That's the ingredient, because some of you have been asking me. I have some butter, and I do have 3 sticks of butter here. And I'm going to be using 2 different kinds of extracts. I'm going to be using almond extract, and I'm going to be using a vanilla extract. In my mixer, I'm going to add my unsalted butter, and this has been softened at room temperature. I'm going to add in the sugars, and I'm going to add in the salt. And I'm just going to cream this together until it comes together. From there, I'm going to add in the extracts. I'm going to add in the spices. Let that mix for a little bit to get incorporated. And then I'm going to add in the flour last. And I'm just going to add it in a little bit at a time so it doesn't spray all over the place. And once that's mixed together, then you could just put it off to the side until your dough is ready to be rolled out. After about an hour, the dough should have doubled. A little more than an hour it may take as well, depending on how warm your kitchen is. And from there, I'm just going to punch it down. I'm going to knead it a bit, just to break down the proteins and the glutens in the dough. Makes it a lot easier to work with as well. And if you need some flour to stop it from sticking, then by all means use some more. But you can tell how spongy this dough is, all from the yeast in here. And now I'm going to just roll this out to about the size of the pan, which is 9 by 13 inches. I'm just going to press it out a little bit. I don't like to overly roll out dough. In fact, the less you do to dough, the better off it turns out in the long run. And then I'm just going to put it in the pan and just flatten it out so it reaches all sides. And with the fork, I'm going to pierce it throughout. And what this will do is it will release the steam as it bakes. And I do have my oven preheated at 350 degrees. And from there I'm going to add the topping. Now you'll notice it's a balled up, sticky topping. It's not real crumbly looking like you would see in an apple pie. And I'm just going to place this on top throughout and just push it down. I like to just cover the whole cake first and then I will blend it together. There's so much butter in here that as it bakes, it actually will melt together and bake together. Now I'm going to bake this in the oven for approximately an hour. Always check in maybe about 5-10 minutes before. Every oven is kind of configured differently. Now I took my crumb buns out and I let them cool completely. And now I'm going to just sprinkle some white confectioner sugar on top. Notice how golden brown this is. It's a little bit darker than normal because I use the raw sugar, which is darker in color. If you were to use a granulated sugar, your crumb buns would probably come out of the oven a lot lighter than this, but it's not going to matter because we're just covering it up with the powdered sugar as well. And at this point I'm going to cut them into portions. I'm just going to eyeball it. And I like to make big portions. Now also what you can do is you can melt up some chocolate and just do some sort of drizzle on top just to give it a little bit of a decoration. And what I'm going to do is I'm only going to drizzle maybe half of these. And I'm going to leave the other ones plain. And I don't really like to put that much chocolate on, just enough to make it look a little nicer. Usually crumb buns are good enough without any kind of chocolate on it. Now this is what a really good crumb bun looks like. And if you look closely, you'll notice that it's about 2/3 crumb, 1/3 cake. And let's face it, isn't the best part of a crumb cake the crumb part? And the cake is good, but really just you look forward to eating the crumb in the crumb cake. Also, you'll notice the crumb on the crumb buns, it's not as crumbly. It's a little more firm, but it still tastes very good. So for this recipe, for all the other recipes and tutorials, make sure you go to cinnamonsweetshoppe.com, subscribe to this channel for more recipes, and comment below. Let me know how yours turned out.